My son's fiancé called my Purple Heart war junk and laughed when my hands started shaking at our family dinner. My name is Sheila Brooks, 58 years old, retired Army Sergeant Major with 21 years of service. Jessica Park thought she had me figured out from my quiet demeanor, my 2005 Ford Explorer with 165,000 miles, and the way I sometimes freeze when a car backfires in the parking lot. She had no idea that the trembling hands she mocked carried the weight of Fallujah, that the medals she called junk were earned protecting people like her, that the quiet woman who shopped at thrift stores and drove an old SUV was sitting on decisions that would change her entire future. When she crossed the line at our Juneteenth celebration, calling my fallen soldiers dead friends I kept like trophies, I didn't raise my voice, I didn't argue, I just smiled and made one phone call that flipped her whole world upside down. If you're watching this, please subscribe and let me know where you're from, especially if you have veterans in your family. This is the story of how a summer barbecue turned into the most expensive lesson about respect Jessica Park ever received. Let me show you how someone who thought they knew everything learned they knew nothing at all. Here's what Jessica saw when she looked at me. A 58-year-old black woman who worked 30 years between military service and post-retirement odd jobs. Someone who wore $18 Walmart jeans and $22 clearance rack shirts from Target. Someone whose hands shook when stressed, who sometimes stared off into space during conversations, who jumped at sudden loud noises. Jessica noticed all of this during the 4 months she'd been engaged to my son Andre. What she didn't notice was why I lived the way I did. She never asked about the photo on my mantle showing me in full dress uniform receiving the Purple Heart. Never wondered why I drove past the new car dealership every week but kept my old Explorer running. Never questioned how a woman on a fixed income owned a 3.5-acre estate in an Atlanta suburb where houses started at $2 million. Jessica saw what she wanted to see, an awkward, damaged veteran who didn't fit into her Instagram-perfect wedding vision. The first warning sign came 4 months before the wedding date. I was at Andre's apartment, helping him install new kitchen cabinets when Jessica came home early from brunch with her sorority sisters. She didn't know I was there, didn't see my Explorer parked around back. I heard her on the phone in the living room, talking to someone about wedding planning. "Girl, I'm telling you, Andre's mom is going to be a problem," she said, her voice carrying through the apartment. "She has these PTSD episodes or whatever. Last week at dinner, a waiter dropped a tray and she literally ducked under the table. It was so embarrassing." Her friend must have said something sympathetic because Jessica laughed. "I know, right? Like, I get that she was in the military, but that was 20 years ago. At some point you need to get over it and stop making everything about your trauma. We're trying to plan a wedding, not run a therapy session." I stood there in Andre's kitchen, holding a cabinet door, listening to my service and my injury being reduced to an inconvenience, to something I should just get over. I didn't confront her. I quietly finished installing the cabinet, left through the back door, and drove home in silence. That night, I pulled out my shadow box from the closet. Inside were my Purple Heart, my Army Commendation Medal, my Combat Action Badge, and 3 sets of dog tags that didn't belong to me. They belonged to Sergeant First Class Mike Torres, Staff Sergeant David Kim, and Corporal Jennifer Walsh, 3 soldiers who served under my command. 3 people who never got the chance to come home and be embarrassed about their trauma. Mike Torres was 24 when he died, protecting our convoy outside Fallujah in 2004. He took shrapnel meant for me, pushed me behind a barrier seconds before the blast. David Kim was 26, killed by sniper fire while delivering medical supplies to a village clinic in 2007. Jennifer Walsh was 22, lost to an IED while escorting civilian contractors to a safe zone. The hands that Jessica mocked, the ones that shake when I'm startled, they shake because they held Mike Torres while he bled out on Iraqi sand. They shake because they zipped David Kim into a body bag. They shake because they saluted when Jennifer Walsh's flag-draped coffin loaded onto a transport plane. Jessica called these soldiers my dead friends, like they were high school buddies I couldn't let go of. She had no idea that Mike Torres had a daughter who just graduated nursing school on scholarships funded by his death benefits. That David Kim's parents still sent me Christmas cards thanking me for bringing their son's body home for burial. That Jennifer Walsh saved 15 civilian lives the day she lost hers. But I didn't tell Jessica any of this, not yet. Because here's what I learned in 21 years of military service. The loudest person in the room is rarely the most powerful. The quietest person is usually the one calculating their next move, and sometimes the best way to teach someone about respect is to let them keep talking until they reveal exactly who they are. Jessica Park was about to get an education. She just didn't know the tuition was already set, and the price was higher than she could possibly imagine. The second warning came during wedding planning. Jessica had strong opinions about everything, especially about who should and shouldn't be involved in the ceremony. Andre and I were sitting in his living room going over the guest list when Jessica walked in with her wedding planner binder, the one she carried everywhere like a Bible. "Okay, so I've been thinking about the reception speeches," she announced, dropping the binder on the coffee table. "I really think we should skip having your mom speak." Andre looked up from his laptop. "What? Why would we skip Mom?" Jessica sat down, crossing her legs, already prepared for this argument. Because baby, think about it. What if she has one of her episodes? What if she starts talking about her military friends and gets all emotional? I don't want our guests feeling uncomfortable. Mom's actually a really good speaker, Jess. She used to brief commanding officers. About war stuff, Andre. About combat and death and trauma. Jessica's voice took on that patient tone she used when explaining things to people she thought were slow. "This is our wedding day. I want people celebrating love, not thinking about PTSD and dead soldiers." That word, dead soldiers. Like Mike, David, and Jennifer were statistics instead of people. Like their sacrifice was an inconvenience to her aesthetic. Andra shifted uncomfortably. "I don't know, Jess. It would really hurt her feelings if we didn't include her. Your mom will understand. She's reasonable." Jessica pulled out her phone, scrolling through photos. "Look, I found the perfect venue, the Piedmont Estate. It's where Amber had her wedding last summer. 250 guests, indoor and outdoor spaces, and get this, they have a helipad for aerial photography." I watched her swipe through photos of white columns and manicured gardens, and something clicked. "That's a beautiful venue," I said quietly. "How much does a place like that run?" Jessica barely glanced at me. "The deposit is $52,000, but it's worth every penny. This is a once-in-a-lifetime event." $52,000 for a deposit, I repeated. "That's significant." "Well, that's what quality costs." Jessica turned back to Andre. "Your company gives signing bonuses, right? We could use part of that for the venue." Andre rubbed his face, a gesture I recognized. He did that when stressed. "Jess, my signing bonus was $15,000, and it's already allocated for student loans and the apartment security deposit. Then we'll figure something out. My parents can contribute some. Your mom probably has savings." Jessica said this casually, like my bank account was a resource she could access. "I mean, she doesn't really spend money on anything anyway. What else is she saving for?" What else was I saving for? As if my entire existence should be in service of funding her perfect day. But I didn't correct her. Didn't mention that my savings account had $8,400, carefully accumulated from disability benefits and occasional consulting work for veteran organizations. Didn't explain that every dollar I didn't spend on myself went into an emergency fund because I'd learned the hard way that life doesn't care about your plans. The conversation moved on to flower arrangements and photographer options, but I stopped listening. I was doing math in my head. Math about wedding costs and estate values and legal documents stored in a safe deposit box downtown. Math about choices that Robert, my late husband, had made 5 years ago when he updated his will during his final bout with cancer. "Andre, baby, are you even listening?" Jessica's voice cut through my thoughts. "Sorry, yeah, flowers. White roses. White roses and peonies. There's a difference." Jessica stood up, gathering her binder. "I have to meet the caterer in 30 minutes. Your mom can stay here, right?" "I don't want her coming to this meeting." Andre frowned. "Why not?" "Because last time she came to a planning meeting, she asked the coordinator if they had PTSD-friendly options. Do you know how embarrassing that was? The woman thought we were running a therapy event instead of a wedding. What I'd actually asked was whether the venue had quiet spaces available, because I knew some of Andre's military friends from his ROTC days might attend, some of whom had served overseas. But Jessica had heard what she wanted to hear. She saw my awareness of others' needs as embarrassing instead of considerate. After Jessica left, Andre and I sat in silence for a moment. Then he spoke, his voice careful. "Mom, I know Jessica can be a little intense about the wedding." "A little intense. Okay, a lot intense. But she doesn't mean anything by the comments about your service. She just doesn't understand military culture." "Has she tried to understand?" Andre didn't answer that. Instead, he changed the subject to work, to his new project management role, to anything but the woman he was planning to marry and her complete lack of respect for the things that shaped his mother's life. I drove home that evening thinking about choices. About the choice I made at 19 to join the Army instead of going to college. About the choice I made at 24 to volunteer for deployment to Iraq. About the choice I made at 37 to stay in service even after Robert begged me to come home after my injury. About the choice Robert made at 53, lying in a hospital bed, when he wrote a clause into his will that none of us had talked about since his funeral. That clause was about to become very relevant. Jessica Park thought she was planning a wedding at the Piedmont estate with aerial photography and $52,000 deposits. She had no idea she was actually planning the most expensive education of her life, and the tuition was about to come due in ways she never saw coming. The estate that Jessica wanted for aerial wedding photos wasn't some random venue. It was my home. The 3.5-acre property in Decatur with the 1,925 colonial house, the oak trees older than my military service, the wraparound porch where Robert and I had our first dance as newlyweds 32 years ago. The same property Jessica had been walking through with her wedding planner for the past 3 months, talking about updating this outdated place and modernizing the shabby landscaping. She didn't know the property was mine because I'd never told her. Why would I? Jessica never asked where I lived. She'd been to Andre's apartment dozens of times but never once said, "Hey, Mrs. Brooks, I'd love to see your place." Never wondered how a woman she assumed was poor could afford to live anywhere at all. The truth was complicated. Robert had inherited the property from his grandmother in 1998. When we got married in 1992, we lived in military housing on base, moving every few years with my deployments and transfers. But Robert's grandmother Edith had always kept this house, the family home, waiting for us. When she passed, Robert became the sole heir. We moved in during my second deployment to Iraq in 2007. Robert sent me photos of him painting the kitchen, refinishing the hardwood floors, planting rose bushes along the front walk. "This is where we'll grow old together," he wrote in letters I still kept in a box under my bed. "This is where Andre will bring his kids someday." Robert believed in permanence, in legacy, in family roots that went deeper than one generation. When I came home from Iraq in 2008 with shrapnel scars and hands that wouldn't stop shaking, Robert sat with me on that wraparound porch every evening. He didn't try to fix me, didn't tell me to get over it. He just sat there, holding my trembling hands, telling me about his day teaching middle school history, about the students who reminded him of me at that age, fierce and determined and unwilling to quit. "You survived, Sheila," he'd say. "That's not nothing. That's everything." Robert died 5 years ago. Pancreatic cancer, the kind that moves fast and doesn't negotiate. He was 53 years old. In his final weeks, when the pain medication made him drift in and out of consciousness, he'd made me promise 2 things. First, that I'd take care of Andre, make sure he found someone who valued what mattered, someone who understood sacrifice and service, and the difference between success and significance. Second, that I'd protect this house, keep it in the family, make sure it went to someone who would honor what it represented. 2 months before he died, Robert called his lawyer, Patricia Morrison, to his hospital bedside. I was there when he updated his will, when he added the clause that I hadn't thought much about until Jessica started planning her wedding on my property. The estate, currently valued at $2.8 million, would pass to Andre upon my death with one condition. Andre's spouse must demonstrate understanding and respect for military service and sacrifice through meaningful action, not just words. The determination of whether this condition is met will be made by Sheila Brooks as executor, with consultation from Patricia Morrison as legal counsel. If the condition is not met, the estate will be sold and proceeds donated to the Mike Torres, David Kim, and Jennifer Walsh Memorial Fund for Gold Star families. "I know this seems controlling," Robert had said, his voice weak but firm. "But Sheila, I've watched too many military families get taken advantage of by people who don't understand what you've sacrificed. I want Andre to marry someone who gets it. Someone who sees your Purple Heart as an honor, not junk. Someone who respects what you and your soldiers gave." I'd agreed because Robert was dying and I would have agreed to anything, but also because I understood what he meant. He'd seen how some of Andre's previous girlfriends treated me. The polite discomfort when I mentioned deployment. The quick subject changes when I talked about Mike, David, or Jennifer. The subtle ways people made it clear that my past was something to be gotten over, not honored. Patricia Morrison had been clear about the legal implications. "This clause is enforceable, Sheila. If you determine that Andre's spouse doesn't meet the criteria, the estate cannot pass to him. Period. He'd inherit nothing." "What if Andre chooses someone anyway? Someone I don't approve? Then he makes his choice, and you make yours. But understand, if you enforce this clause, Andre loses $2.8 million in inheritance. That's life-changing money." Life-changing was an understatement. My disability benefits were $1,850 a month. My small pension was another $680. I lived on $2,530 a month total. The estate was paid off, no mortgage, which was the only reason I could afford to keep it. But property taxes were $14,000 a year. Maintenance, utilities, insurance, another $8,000 annually. I was spending $22,000 a year just to keep this house standing. Without the estate, I'd be living in a one-bedroom apartment in a neighborhood where gunshots were more common than backfires. Andre knew none of this. He assumed I was comfortable, secure, set for retirement. He didn't know that every month was a careful calculation of which bills to pay first, which expenses could wait, how much I could save before the next property tax bill came due. The estate was Andre's future security. But it was also the last promise I'd made to a dying man who'd held my shaking hands and told me I was enough. Jessica Park was walking all over that promise with her designer heels and her dismissive comments about war junk. She was planning her dream wedding on property that might never belong to the man she was marrying. And she had absolutely no idea that her own words were determining whether her future included $2.8 million or nothing at all. The decision ahead of me wasn't just about respect or boundaries. It was about whether I'd enforce my dead husband's wishes and potentially destroy my son's financial future, or whether I'd ignore those wishes and let someone who called my Purple Heart junk inherit the legacy Robert died protecting. The Juneteenth celebration was coming up in 2 weeks. Jessica would be there, at my home, probably making more comments about my outdated house and my embarrassing military trauma. And I'd be watching, listening, calculating whether this woman understood anything at all about the cost of the freedom she enjoyed. The clock was ticking, and Jessica didn't even know the timer had started. What I didn't know about Jessica Park was that her cruelty had a source. I found out 3 days before the Juneteenth celebration, and it changed everything I thought I understood about her. Andre came by the house unannounced on a Tuesday afternoon. I was in the garden pruning the rose bushes Robert had planted, the ones that bloomed every June like clockwork. Andre's car pulled into the driveway fast, gravel crunching under his tires. When he got out, his face was tight with something I couldn't quite read. Anger, maybe, or grief. "Mom, we need to talk." I set down my pruning shears and walked over to the porch. "What's wrong?" "I just found out something about Jessica. Something she's never told me." He sat down hard on the porch steps. "She has a brother. Had a brother, Daniel. He died in Iraq in 2007. The words hit me like cold water. "What?" "Daniel Park. Specialist. Army. He was 22 years old when an IED killed him outside Baghdad." Andre pulled out his phone, showing me a memorial page he'd found. Jessica was 11 when it happened. She's never mentioned him. Not once in 18 months of dating. I looked at the photo on the screen. A young Korean-American soldier in dress uniform, smiling wide, his whole life ahead of him. Specialist Daniel Park. Killed in action the 15th of March 2007. The same year I was deployed to Iraq on my second tour. The same year David Kim died. "How did you find out?" Her mom let it slip during a phone call. Jessica was in the shower, and Mrs. Park was talking to me about the wedding, about how hard it is for their family to celebrate anything military-related. When I asked what she meant, she just froze. Then she told me everything. Andre's hands were shaking now, just like mine did. "Mom, Jessica's entire childhood was destroyed by her brother's death. Her parents divorced 2 years later. Her mom had a breakdown. Her dad started drinking. Jessica spent her teenage years in therapy trying to deal with survivor's guilt because she'd fought with Daniel the week before he deployed. Their last conversation was an argument about him borrowing her laptop without asking. I sat down next to my son, my mind racing. That's why she hates military talk. It's not even hate, Mom, it's trauma. When she sees you have an episode, when your hands shake or you get that distant look, she sees Daniel. She told her mom that being around you is like being forced to relive the worst period of her life over and over. Did she tell you this? No. That's the problem. She won't talk about it. Her mom says Jessica has completely shut down anything military-related. She won't visit Arlington Cemetery where Daniel is buried. She won't attend Memorial Day events. She changed the channel when military commercials come on TV. She's been running from this for 17 years. I thought about every comment Jessica had made, every eye roll when I mentioned my service, every dismissive remark about PTSD. I'd assumed it was privilege and ignorance. I'd never considered it might be pain. When your hands shake, you're remembering Mike Torres, Andre said quietly. When Jessica sees your hands shake, she's remembering Daniel. You're both traumatized by the same war, just in different ways. Why didn't she tell you about him? Because she doesn't tell anyone. Her mom says Jessica buried Daniel's existence the same day they buried his body. She took down all his photos in her room, stopped talking about him completely. When people ask if she has siblings, she says no. It's like she's trying to erase him from history. I picked up my phone and searched for Specialist Daniel Park, found his memorial page, his service record, news articles about his death. He'd been escorting civilian contractors when his vehicle hit an IED. 3 soldiers died that day. Daniel was one of them. He died doing the exact same thing Jennifer Walsh died doing, protecting civilians. "There's something else," Andre said. "Mrs. Park told me that Jessica blames the army for Daniel's death, not the insurgents who planted the bomb." "The army." She believes they sent him on a pointless mission, that his death meant nothing, that he died for oil and politics and lies. A lot of families feel that way. But Mom, she's directing that anger at you, at your service, your sacrifice, your trauma. She sees you as a reminder of everything she's tried to forget. I sat there on my porch, looking at my rose bushes, thinking about Robert's will and Jessica's dead brother, and the impossible situation we were all trapped in. Jessica Park wasn't just a privileged girl mocking something she didn't understand. She was a traumatized woman facing daily reminders of the worst loss of her life. When she called my Purple Heart war junk, she was calling Daniel's sacrifice junk. When she said veterans needed to move on, she was telling herself to move on from grief she'd never processed. When she mocked my PTSD, she was running from her own trauma. "What are you going to do?" Andre asked. "I don't know." That was the truth. Robert's will clause was about whether Andre's spouse respected military sacrifice. But how do you judge respect when someone's relationship with the military is built entirely on traumatic loss? How do you separate legitimate grief from disrespectful behavior? "She's been seeing a therapist," Andre added. "For the past 6 months, her mom just told me." Jessica finally started dealing with Daniel's death after I proposed. She realized she couldn't move forward in life while still running from her past. Is it helping? I don't know. She hasn't told me any of this herself. I only know because her mom broke down and told me everything. He stood up, pacing the porch. "Mom, I'm supposed to marry this woman in 4 months, and she's kept her entire emotional history secret from me. She let me think she was just uncomfortable around military stuff, when really she's been drowning in unprocessed grief." I watched my son struggle with this revelation and saw Robert in him, the same need to fix things, to make sense of pain, to find solutions where maybe none existed. "The Juneteenth celebration is this Saturday," I said. "Jessica's planning to be here, right?" "Yeah, she's bringing her parents. It's going to be the first time they've been around military families since Daniel died." Andre looked at me. "Mom, whatever you're planning to do about the will, about the estate, maybe we should wait. Maybe we should give Jessica a chance to explain herself first." Maybe we should. But Jessica had been engaged to Andre for 4 months and hadn't explained anything. She'd been coming to my house for months, walking through rooms where Robert died, planning a wedding on property she thought was hers to use, all while hiding the fact that my uniform probably gave her nightmares. Trauma didn't excuse cruelty, but it did explain it. The question was whether understanding where her pain came from changed anything about the damage she was doing. I was about to find out. The Juneteenth celebration arrived with clear skies and humidity thick enough to cut with a knife. I'd been hosting this gathering for 8 years, ever since Robert died. Every year, I invited military families, Gold Star parents, veterans from my unit, and community members who understood what freedom actually cost. This year, we had 45 people coming. Jessica had no idea what she was walking into. I spent Friday setting up folding tables under the oak trees, stringing lights across the porch, preparing food that Robert used to make. His famous dry rub ribs, potato salad with extra mustard, collard greens cooked the way his grandmother taught him. Every dish was a memory, a connection to something bigger than just a backyard barbecue. Patricia Morrison arrived early Saturday morning to help set up. She'd been Robert's lawyer and had become a friend over the years, one of the few people who knew about the will clause and what was at stake. "You ready for today?" she asked, carrying a cooler from her car. "No, but I don't think there's any way to be ready for this. Andre told you about Jessica's brother? 3 days ago. Changed the whole equation, didn't it?" Patricia set down the cooler and looked at me directly. "Sheila, I need to be clear about something as your legal counsel. Trauma doesn't invalidate the will clause. Robert's requirement was that Andre's spouse demonstrate respect for military sacrifice through meaningful action. Whether Jessica has personal trauma related to military service doesn't change the legal standard. But it changes the moral standard. Does it? Because from where I'm standing, having a brother die in service should make someone more respectful of veterans, not less. Grief isn't a license to mock other people's trauma. She was right, but it still felt complicated. Jessica's cruelty came from a place of pain I understood intimately. The difference was, I'd learned to honor my pain instead of weaponizing it. Guests started arriving around noon. The Williams family, whose son Marcus had served in my unit and was now a VA counselor. The Torres family, Mike's parents, who made the drive from South Carolina every year. The Kims, David's parents who treated me like a daughter. Jennifer Walsh's younger sister Amy, now a teacher, who brought her 2-year-old son named after her sister. These weren't just guests, they were my chosen family. People who understood that some losses never heal, you just learn to carry them differently. Andre arrived at 1 p.m. with Jessica and her parents. I watched from the kitchen window as they got out of Andre's car. Jessica was wearing a white sundress and sunglasses, looking like she was heading to a garden party, not a gathering honoring fallen soldiers. Mr. and Mrs. Park looked uncomfortable, their faces tight with the kind of tension that comes from forced attendance at something you'd rather avoid. I walked out to greet them. Jessica, Mr. and Mrs. Park, welcome. Mrs. Park's eyes were already filling with tears just looking at my house, at the small American flag by the front door, at the memorial wreath with Daniel's photo that I'd hung that morning. Yes, I'd found his photo online and included him. If Jessica's family was going to be here, their son deserved to be honored too. Mrs. Brooks, Mr. Park said stiffly, shaking my hand. Thank you for having us. Jessica saw the wreath and froze. Just stopped walking, staring at her brother's face, surrounded by flowers and red, white, and blue ribbon. What is that? That's Daniel, your brother, Specialist Daniel Park, killed in action the 15th of March 2007. I said it gently but firmly. Every soldier honored here today gave everything, including him. You have no right. Jessica's voice was shaking. You have no right to use my brother for your military worship party. Jess, Andre put his hand on her arm. Mom's honoring Daniel. That's a good thing. No, it's manipulation. She found out about him, and now she's using him to make some kind of point. Jessica turned to me, and I could see years of pain behind those sunglasses. You don't know anything about my brother. You don't know what his death did to our family. You don't get to put his picture on your door like he's one of your trophies. You're right. I didn't know Daniel, but I knew soldiers exactly like him. I commanded them. I lost them. And I honor them because their families deserve to have their sacrifice recognized, even when it's too painful to look at. Mrs. Park was crying now, openly, her husband's arm around her shoulders. Jessica, baby, maybe this is what we need. To see Daniel honored. To remember him as a hero, instead of just as our loss. He wasn't a hero, Mom. He was a kid who died for nothing. Those words carried across the yard. Several conversations stopped. Mike Torres's father stood up from his chair, his face hard. Jennifer Walsh's sister turned around, holding her baby tighter. These were families who'd also lost children, who'd also buried pieces of their hearts in Arlington Cemetery or in small-town graveyards across America. And here was Jessica Park, telling them it was all for nothing. I said quietly, we should go inside and talk. Just the four of us. Patricia, can you make sure our guests are comfortable? Patricia nodded, already moving toward the Torres family, offering reassurance with her presence. I led Jessica, Andre, and her parents into my living room, the one Jessica had wanted to renovate and modernize. We sat down, and for a long moment, nobody spoke. Then Mrs. Park broke the silence. Jessica, Mrs. Brooks knows about Daniel. She knows you've been struggling with his death. We need to talk about this. We've needed to talk about this for 17 years. There's nothing to talk about. Daniel died. It destroyed our family. And I'm not going to pretend that wrapping his death in a flag makes it meaningful. Jessica pulled off her sunglasses, and her eyes were red, angry, grieving. Do you know what it's like to wake up every day knowing your brother is dead because some politicians decided oil was worth more than human lives? Do you know what it's like to watch your mother have a breakdown, your father become an alcoholic, your whole childhood just disappear because of one stupid war? Yes, I said simply, I do know, because I came back from that war and spent 15 years waking up to the same questions. Why did Mike die and not me? Why did David take that sniper bullet? Why did Jennifer's convoy hit that IED instead of mine? I know exactly what it's like to be angry at the war, at the politicians, at the universe itself. Then why do you honor it? Why do you wear that uniform in photos and display those medals like they're something to be proud of? Because the alternative is letting their deaths mean nothing. Mike Torres died protecting me. If I don't honor that, if I don't make his sacrifice matter by how I live my life, then he really did die for nothing. Jessica stood up abruptly, pacing to the window. I can't do this. I can't be here with all these people celebrating death and calling it service. They're not celebrating death, Jess. Andre's voice was strained. They're finding meaning in loss. There's a difference. Is there? She turned around, and I saw my son's fiancée clearly for the first time. Not as an enemy or an obstacle, but as a 8-year-old woman still trapped in the grief of an 1-year-old girl who'd lost her big brother. Outside, I could hear the party continuing. Laughter, conversation, children playing. Inside, we were suspended in a moment that would determine everything that came next. I stood up and walked to my bookshelf, pulling out a worn leather folder. Inside were documents I'd been carrying for 5 years, ever since Robert died. I handed the folder to Andre. What's this? He asked. Your father's will. The updated version from 2019. I think it's time everyone understood what's actually at stake here. Andre opened the folder, his eyes scanning the legal language. I watched his face change as he reached the clause about the estate, about the condition for inheritance, about the $2.8 million that hung in the balance. Jessica moved closer, reading over his shoulder. Wait, Andre said slowly. This house, this entire property, it only passes to me if my spouse demonstrates respect for military service through meaningful action? He looked up at me. Mom, what does that even mean? It means exactly what it says. Your father believed that whoever joined our family needed to understand what military sacrifice meant. Not just tolerate it, understand it, honor it. Jessica's face had gone pale. This whole time, while I've been planning our wedding here, this property was conditional? You were evaluating me? I wasn't evaluating you, Jessica. You were evaluating yourself. Every comment, every eye roll, every time you called my service trauma an embarrassment, you were writing your own report card. So, this is blackmail. Respect the military or Andre loses his inheritance. Her voice was rising again, anger covering fear. It's not blackmail. It's a boundary. Robert watched too many military families get taken advantage of by people who saw their sacrifice as weakness. He didn't want that for our son. Andre was still staring at the document. How much is this property worth? The last appraisal was $2.8 million. No mortgage, fully paid. The number hit him visibly. $2.8 million. And if Jessica doesn't meet the criteria in Dad's will, what happens? Patricia Morrison's voice came from the doorway. I hadn't heard her come in, but there she was, legal counsel and witness. If Sheila determines the criteria isn't met, the estate is sold and proceeds go to the memorial fund for Gold Star families. Andre inherits nothing. "This is insane," Jessica said. "You can't control who your son marries from beyond the grave. That's not legal." "Actually, it is," Patricia replied. "Conditional inheritance based on behavioral standards is perfectly legal as long as the conditions are clearly stated and not discriminatory. Requiring respect for military service falls well within acceptable parameters." Mr. Park spoke for the first time since we'd come inside. "Mrs. Brooks, my daughter has trauma related to military service. Trauma she's been dealing with for 17 years. Surely that context matters here." "It does matter, Mr. Park. But trauma doesn't give anyone the right to mock other people's pain. Jessica has called my Purple Heart war junk. She's suggested I use PTSD as an excuse to be antisocial. She's dismissed the deaths of soldiers I served with as something I should just get over." I looked at Jessica directly. "I understand you're hurting, but you've been hurting me too. So what do I have to do?" Jessica's voice was different now, calculated. "What's the test? Do I have to volunteer at a VA hospital, donate to veteran charities, pretend to care about your dead friends? If you have to pretend, then you've already failed." Andre set down the will documents. "Mom, I need to know something. If you enforce this clause, if you decide Jessica doesn't qualify, I lose everything?" "You lose the estate. Not everything. The estate is everything. It's my future financial security. It's the difference between struggling and stability. He paused. "It's the life Dad wanted me to have. Your father wanted you to have a life built on the right foundation. Money on top of a foundation of respect and honor, not money instead of those things." Jessica sat down hard on the couch. "When do you decide? When do you determine whether I pass or fail your dead husband's loyalty test?" "I already know," I said quietly. The room went silent. Even Patricia looked surprised. "You know? Right now? You already know?" Andre's voice was strained. "I've known for weeks, Andre. I've been watching, listening, giving Jessica chances to show me something other than contempt for military service. And what I've seen is someone who calls sacrifice junk, who mocks trauma, who plans her dream wedding on property she thinks is beneath her while showing zero gratitude or respect." "But you just found out about Daniel?" Mrs. Park interjected. "You just learned that Jessica's behavior comes from profound loss. Doesn't that change your assessment?" "It explains her behavior. It doesn't excuse it." I turned to Jessica. "Your brother died serving this country. He died protecting people he'd never met. And instead of honoring that sacrifice, you've spent 17 years running from it and attacking anyone who reminds you of him. That's not grief, Jessica. That's betrayal." Jessica stood up, shaking. "You have no right to tell me how to grieve my brother." "You're right. But I have every right to decide who inherits this property. And I've decided." "Mom, wait." Andre moved between us. "Before you say anything else, before you make this final, I need to tell you something." He looked at Jessica, then back at me. "Jessica has been volunteering at the VA hospital in Atlanta for the past 6 months. Every Tuesday and Thursday evening. She didn't tell me. She didn't tell anyone. I just found out yesterday." I turned to Jessica. "Is that true?" She wouldn't meet my eyes. "It doesn't matter." "It matters to me." "Why didn't you mention it?" "Because," Jessica's voice cracked, "because I didn't want anyone to think I was doing it for the wrong reasons. After Andre proposed, after I met you and realized how much military service meant to your family, I thought maybe if I spent time at the VA, if I actually faced what I'd been running from, I could work through my issues with Daniel's death. I started volunteering. I read to veterans. I helped with art therapy sessions. I sat with guys having PTSD episodes and held their hands while they cried. Just like your mother held your hand when you cried about Daniel," Mrs. Park added softly. "I did it because I knew I couldn't marry Andre while still hating everything military. I knew I needed to heal. But then I found out about this property, about your condition for inheritance, and suddenly I didn't know if I was healing or just trying to pass a test. Jessica finally looked at me. So yeah, I've been volunteering at the VA. For 6 months. Every week. But I have no idea if I did it because I genuinely wanted to honor Daniel's service or because some part of me knew there was money on the line. Patricia stepped forward. Sheila, this changes things. Meaningful action through understanding military sacrifice. That was Robert's requirement. 6 months of consistent VA volunteering could certainly qualify. Could, I repeated, if it was genuine. But Jessica just admitted she doesn't know her own motivations. Does anyone ever really know their motivations completely? Patricia challenged. People do the right thing for complicated reasons all the time. The question is whether the action itself has value, regardless of what drove it. Andre looked between all of us. So what now? Mom, what do you decide? I looked at Jessica Park, this young woman carrying grief she'd never processed, volunteering at a VA hospital while simultaneously mocking my service, loving my son while disrespecting the values that shaped him. She was a walking contradiction, and I had to decide whether that contradiction disqualified her from $2.8 million and my son's future. The answer wasn't as clear as I'd thought it would be. I walked to the window, looking out at my backyard full of Gold Star families, veterans, and people who understood sacrifice in ways Jessica was just beginning to learn. They were laughing, sharing stories, honoring the dead by living fully. That's what Robert would have wanted. I need to see proof, I said finally. Patricia, can we verify Jessica's volunteer work? I can call the VA hospital Monday morning, get records of her hours, supervisor feedback, documentation of consistent service. Jessica pulled out her phone with shaking hands. I have my volunteer coordinator's number. Her name is Helen Martinez. You can call her right now. I took the phone and stepped onto the porch, dialing the number. A woman answered on the third ring. Helen Martinez, VA Volunteer Services. Miss Martinez, my name is Sheila Brooks. I'm calling about Jessica Park, one of your volunteers. Can you tell me about her service with your program? There was a pause. May I ask why you're inquiring? It's related to a family matter. I need to verify her participation and the nature of her work. Well, I can tell you that Jessica has been one of our most dedicated volunteers. She started in January, comes every Tuesday and Thursday evening without fail. She works primarily with our PTSD group therapy sessions and individual veteran support. What does that involve? She sits with veterans during their episodes, reads to them, helps facilitate art therapy. Last month, she organized a memorial garden project where veterans could plant flowers in honor of fallen soldiers. She even brought photos of her brother who died in Iraq and shared his story with the group. My breath caught. She talked about her brother? She did. It was the first time she'd spoken about him publicly in years, she told us. It was incredibly powerful. Some of our veterans who'd lost battle buddies really connected with her grief. They helped each other heal. I thanked Helen and ended the call, standing on my porch trying to process what I'd just heard. Jessica had been doing more than checking a box. She'd been doing the hard work of facing her trauma by sitting with other people's trauma. She'd honored Daniel by helping veterans who reminded her of him. When I walked back inside, everyone was waiting. The VA confirmed everything I said, 6 months of consistent service, including sharing Daniel's story with PTSD support groups. Mrs. Park's face crumpled with relief. Mr. Park put his arm around her. Andre looked at Jessica, with something between surprise and admiration. But Jessica just looked exhausted. So I passed? Is that what this means? I did enough meaningful action to qualify for your inheritance? You did work that honored your brother and helped other veterans heal. That's significant. But you still don't think I respect you. You still think I'm disrespectful and cruel. Jessica's voice was flat now. All the fight gone out of her. And you're right, I have been cruel. Because every time I look at you, every time your hands shake or you get that distant look, I see Daniel. I see the last time we video called before he died and his hands were shaking just like yours. I see my mom, after they told us he was dead, her whole body trembling. I see my dad's hands shake when he drinks too much and cries about his son. She wiped her eyes roughly. I know it's not fair to take that out on you. I know my trauma doesn't give me the right to mock your trauma, but knowing that and stopping myself are two different things. The VA volunteering has helped. Sitting with those veterans, hearing their stories, seeing that they're real people with real pain, not just reminders of Daniel, that's helped. But I'm not fixed. I'm not suddenly okay with military service and sacrifice and all of it. I'm just trying. Trying counts, I said quietly. Does it? Does it count enough for $2.8 million? And there it was, the question underneath everything, the money, the inheritance, the future that hung on my assessment of whether this complicated, traumatized, occasionally cruel young woman had done enough to honor Robert's memory and meet his conditions. I looked at Andre, my son, who'd been silent through most of this. What do you think your father would say right now? He thought for a long moment. I think Dad would say that Jessica is doing the work, that she's facing what she's been running from, that healing isn't linear and people deserve grace while they're trying. He paused. But I also think Dad would say that money shouldn't be the thing that forces someone to change, that if Jessica is only volunteering because of the inheritance, then we've already lost something important. I'm not only volunteering for the money, Jessica said. But I'd be lying if I said the inheritance didn't matter. Of course it matters. $2.8 million matters. Financial security matters. Not struggling matters. I'm not going to pretend I'm some noble person doing charity work purely from the goodness of my heart. At least you're honest, Patricia observed. Honest doesn't make me deserve the inheritance, though. Does it, Mrs. Brooks? Jessica looked at me directly. You think I'm still the girl who called your Purple Heart war junk. You think I'm calculating and manipulative and doing just enough to pass your test. And maybe you're right. Maybe I am all those things. Or maybe, I said slowly, you're someone who's been drowning in grief for 17 years and finally found a lifeline. Maybe the VA volunteering started as a test you were trying to pass, but became something real along the way. Maybe your motivations were mixed at first, but your impact was genuine regardless. I walked over to the shadow box on my wall, the one holding my Purple Heart, and the dog tags of Mike Torres, David Kim, and Jennifer Walsh. These soldiers died protecting people they didn't know. They didn't ask if those people deserved protection. They didn't evaluate whether those people had pure motivations or complicated reasons for being in harm's way. They just served. They just sacrificed. I turned back to face everyone. Robert's will clause wasn't about making Jessica prove she was perfect. It was about ensuring that whoever joined our family understood what service meant, that they valued sacrifice over comfort, that they knew freedom wasn't free. So what's your decision? Andre asked. I looked at Jessica Park, standing in my living room, her grief and her attempts at healing all tangled up with money and expectations and a dead husband's wishes. I thought about Robert, about what he'd really wanted when he wrote that clause. And I thought about Mike and David and Jennifer, who'd never had the chance to be complicated or make mistakes or grow into better versions of themselves. I've made my decision, I said. But before I tell you what it is, there's something everyone needs to understand about this inheritance, about this estate, and about what Robert actually wanted. I picked up my phone. Patricia, I need you to pull up the full text of Robert's will, not just the clause about conditions, the whole document, because there's something I haven't told anyone, not even Andre. Something Robert added in the final amendment before he died. Patricia looked surprised but pulled out her tablet, accessing the legal files. What am I looking for? Section 7, subsection C, the Executor Discretion Clause. As Patricia scrolled through the document, I watched Jessica's face, Andre's confusion, and Mr. and Mrs. Park's tension. What I was about to reveal would change everything they thought they understood about this inheritance, about Robert's wishes, and about what I'd been evaluating all along. "Found it," Patricia said, her eyes widening as she read. "Oh, Sheila, I'd forgotten about this clause. What does it say?" Andre moved closer to read the screen. I decided to tell them myself, in my own words, the way Robert had explained it to me in his hospital bed 5 years ago, when he knew he was dying and wanted to make sure I understood his final gift to our family. "The executor discretion clause," I said, "gives me the authority to waive the condition entirely if I determine that enforcing it would cause more harm than good to our family." Andre stared at me. "You can just waive it? You could have ignored Dad's condition this whole time?" "Not ignored. Evaluated whether the condition itself was still serving its intended purpose." I sat down, suddenly tired. Robert added that clause because he trusted me to know the difference between protecting our family and controlling it. He didn't want his wishes from the grave to destroy what he'd built in life. Jessica's voice was barely a whisper. "So you've had the power to end this entire situation whenever you wanted?" "Yes." "Then why didn't you? Why put us through all of this?" "Because I needed to see who you really were. Not who you pretended to be. Not who you thought I wanted you to be. Who you actually were when you thought there were no consequences." I looked at her directly. "And I needed you to see who you really were too." Patricia set down her tablet. "Sheila, are you saying you're going to waive the condition?" "I'm saying that Robert's real wish wasn't about testing Jessica. It was about protecting Andre from someone who would see his inheritance as an opportunity instead of a responsibility. Someone who would value the money more than the meaning behind it." "And is that who I am?" Jessica asked. "Someone who values money over meaning?" 6 months ago, I would have said yes. You talked about this estate like it was a wedding venue, not a family legacy. You wanted to modernize and update and erase everything that made it meaningful. You saw square footage and photo opportunities where I saw Robert's memory and my soldier's sacrifice. And now? Now I see someone who's been sitting with veterans every week, listening to their pain, honoring her brother by helping people who remind her of him. That's not someone who values money over meaning. That's someone who's learning what meaning actually costs. Andre moved closer to Jessica, taking her hand. "Mom, what are you deciding?" I stood up and walked to the window again, looking out at the Juneteenth celebration still happening in my backyard. Mike Torres's parents were talking with Jennifer Walsh's sister. David Kim's father was pushing a little girl on the tire swing Robert had hung 15 years ago. These were people who'd lost everything and still found ways to honor what remained. "I'm deciding that Robert was wrong," I said finally. "Not about protecting our family, not about valuing sacrifice and service, but about making money conditional on behavior. About using inheritance as a test of worthiness." The room went completely silent. Robert wrote that will when he was dying and scared that after he was gone, I'd be taken advantage of, scared that Andre would marry someone who didn't understand what we'd sacrificed, scared that this estate, his grandmother's legacy, would end up with someone who didn't deserve it. I turned back to face them. But fear isn't a good foundation for family. And control from the grave isn't love, it's manipulation. "Sheila," Patricia said carefully, "are you certain about this?" "I'm certain that if Robert were alive today, if he could see Jessica volunteering at the VA, if he could see Andre caught between his mother and his fiancé, if he could see what his condition has done to this family, he'd tear up that clause himself." "So the estate goes to Andre, regardless of whether Jessica meets the criteria?" Mr. Park asked. "No," I said, "the estate doesn't go to Andre at all." Andre's face went white. "What?" "I'm refusing to execute that clause of the will. I'm using my discretion as executor to void the conditional inheritance entirely. Which means, according to the alternative provision Robert included, the estate must be sold and the proceeds donated to the Gold Star Memorial Fund." You're giving away $2.8 million? Jessica looked stunned. I'm freeing my son from a test he should never have had to take. I'm freeing you from conditions that were never fair. And I'm honoring Robert's real wish, which was to support military families by making sure this estate serves the people who sacrificed everything. Mom, that's my inheritance. That's my future financial security. Andre's voice was shaking. Your future financial security can't be built on whether your wife passes a grief test. That's not security, that's a trap. I moved closer to him. Andre, your father and I raised you with values, with education, with opportunities. You have a good job. You have skills and intelligence and character. You'll build your own security. You don't need money that comes with conditions that poison family relationships. Mrs. Park was crying again. Mrs. Brooks, Jessica has been trying so hard. She's been facing her trauma, volunteering, doing everything she thought would honor your husband's wishes. And you're still taking away the inheritance? I'm not taking it away. I'm refusing to use it as leverage. There's a difference. I looked at Jessica. You started volunteering at the VA to pass a test, but somewhere along the way, you actually started healing. You honored Daniel by helping other veterans. That healing shouldn't be conditional on money. It should be yours to keep, regardless of what happens with this estate. Jessica sat down slowly, processing what I'd said. So I did all that work for nothing? You did that work for yourself, for your healing, for Daniel's memory. That's not nothing. That's everything. But we lose $2.8 million. You never had $2.8 million. It was never yours to lose. Andre was staring at me like he didn't recognize his own mother. You're really doing this? You're selling our family home and giving away millions of dollars? I'm selling a house. A beautiful, meaningful house, but still just a house. The real family legacy isn't bricks and property value, it's the values Robert and I tried to teach you. And one of those values is that love doesn't come with conditions. Family doesn't come with tests. You choose the person you want to spend your life with based on who they are, not on whether they can pass your dead father's loyalty evaluation. Patricia closed her tablet. I'll need to start the probate process for estate sale. This will take several months to finalize. I understand. And you're absolutely certain about this decision? I looked around the room. At Andre, shocked and angry and confused. At Jessica, crying silently, her parents holding her hands. At Patricia, my friend and lawyer, making sure I understood what I was giving up. I'm certain, I said, because sometimes the most loving thing you can do is let go. 5 months later, the estate sale was finalized. The property sold for $2.9 million to a developer who promised to preserve the historical elements while creating a community center. The proceeds, after legal fees and taxes, came to $2.6 million. Every penny went to the Mike Torres, David Kim, and Jennifer Walsh Memorial Fund for Gold Star families. I moved into a small 2-bedroom apartment in East Atlanta. It had 900 square feet, no wraparound porch, no oak trees older than my military service. But it was mine, paid for with my disability benefits, and it didn't come with the weight of Robert's expectations or the burden of property taxes I could barely afford. Andre didn't speak to me for 6 weeks after my decision. He was angry, hurt, convinced I'd thrown away his future out of spite or stubbornness. Jessica called me once during that time. I don't understand why you did it, she said. I was finally doing better. I was healing. You could have given Andre the inheritance, and everyone would have been happy. Would they? Would you have spent the rest of your life wondering if Andre only married you because you passed the test? Would Andre have wondered if you only stayed because of the money? Would I have wondered if I'd used my dead husband's wishes to control my son's life? She was quiet for a long moment. I hadn't thought about it that way. That's because you're 28 and you think certainty is the same as security. But I'm 58, and I've learned that the most secure thing you can build is a relationship without conditions. The wedding happened in November, smaller than Jessica had originally planned. They rented a simple venue, had 80 guests instead of 250, and Jessica wore her mother's wedding dress instead of buying a new one. I was invited. I went. I sat in the third row and cried when Andre said his vows, not because I was sad, but because I saw my son choosing love without the shadow of inheritance hanging over him. At the reception, Jessica found me during dinner. "Can we talk?" We stepped outside into the cool November air. "I'm still volunteering at the VA," she said, "every Tuesday and Thursday, even after the estate was sold and there was nothing to gain from it." "I know." Helen Martinez told me. "She says you're training to become a peer counselor for Gold Star siblings. Daniel deserves to be remembered. And I spent so long running from his memory that I forgot he was more than just my grief. He was someone who served, who sacrificed, who mattered." She looked at me. "You taught me that. By refusing to let his death be just another tragedy, by insisting that sacrifice means something, you taught me how to honor him. You taught yourself. I just gave you permission to stop running." Jessica smiled. A real smile. The first genuine one I'd seen from her. "The memorial fund you created with the estate money?" It gave a scholarship to a Gold Star kid from Daniel's unit. A girl whose dad died in the same attack as my brother. She's studying nursing, wants to work at a VA hospital. That's what Robert wanted. Legacy that serves. I think I'm starting to understand what Robert wanted, and what you wanted, and why money couldn't be part of the equation. She hugged me then, quickly, awkwardly, but sincerely. "Thank you for not letting me pass your test, for making me figure out who I wanted to be instead of who I needed to be for money." Andre came outside looking for his new wife. He saw us together and paused, uncertain. I walked over to him. "I'm proud of you," I said. "For what?" "I lost millions of dollars. For choosing someone you love and building your own future instead of inheriting mine. That's what your father really wanted. He just didn't know how to give it to you without conditions." Andre pulled me into a hug, the first one since I'd made my decision. "I'm still angry about the money. You're allowed to be. But I think I understand why you did it, and maybe someday I'll even agree with you. Someday is good enough for me." Later that night, I drove back to my small apartment, past the property that used to be mine, now under construction as a community center. In 6 months, it would open with meeting spaces for veteran support groups, memorial gardens where Gold Star families could gather, and programs funded by the estate I'd given away. Robert's legacy wasn't in property or money. It was in the values we'd tried to teach our son. Service over self. Character over comfort. Love without conditions. I'd honored those values the only way I knew how, by letting go of the thing Robert thought he wanted in order to give Andre what he actually needed. Freedom. If you're watching this from somewhere in the world, I hope you understand that the most expensive gifts aren't always the most valuable ones. Sometimes the greatest inheritance you can give someone is the freedom to build their own life without carrying the weight of your expectations. Some legacies are built on money, some are built on meaning, and sometimes the most loving thing you can do is choose meaning over money, even when it costs everything. That's what freedom actually costs, and that's what sacrifice really means. That is Sheila Brooks's story. Now I want to hear from you. Where are you watching this from? What city? What country? Drop it in the comments below. I love seeing our global community, especially those with military families. And what about Jessica? She had trauma from losing her brother Daniel, but she still mocked Sheila's PTSD and called her Purple Heart war junk. Does trauma excuse cruelty? At what point does someone's pain stop being a reason and become just an excuse? Comment below. Hit that like button if this story made you think. Share it if you know someone who's ever been caught between honoring family wishes and living their own life. Someone who's struggled with conditional love or inheritance that came with strings attached. Someone who's had to choose between money and meaning. And subscribe for more raw, real stories about sacrifice, family boundaries, and the difference between control and love. Thanks for watching. Sometimes the most valuable inheritance isn't money or property. It's the freedom to build your own life without conditions. And sometimes the greatest act of love is letting go of control, even when it costs everything. If you have veterans in your family, take a moment to thank them today, not just for their service, but for the quiet strength they carry every single day. Freedom isn't free, but love shouldn't come with conditions either. See you in the next video.